Super Smash Bros. Has always had an issue with representation, and I mean that in more ways than one. When we look back at the very first installment of the series, Smash 64, we can find characters with extremely weird, made-up movesets, the most notorious of which being Captain Falcon, a character from a racing game throwing out baseless made-up moves. As time went on though, the Super Smash Bros. Series became a lot better about how they represented their characters. Movesets slowly became less generic kicks and punches and more references to actual things that the characters do in their games. By the time we got to Smash 4, characters were starting to feel like they were ripped straight out of their games. For example, every single move in Villager's kit is a reference to something you can do in Animal Crossing. Picking weeds, planting trees, shooting slingshots, these are all absurdly accurate to Villager's character. And that's why it feels like such a kick in the balls when I look at Little Mac's moveset. In this video, I'm going to talk about what makes Little Mac the biggest failure in Smash Bros. History. We'll discuss at length what they got wrong, talk briefly about what they got right, and ultimately offer some solutions to what I feel is an absolute travesty of representation. Something I want to clarify right off the bat is that yes, I know that there are technically characters that are just as disrespected as Little Mac. Ganondorf, for example, is a clone of Captain Falcon, even though he never fights like Captain Falcon. But the point I really want to drive home is that they absolutely knew what they were doing by Smash 4, and still chose to make his moveset horribly designed anyway. Ganondorf is a clone as a result of Melee having an incredibly short development cycle of 13 months. Additionally, Melee was when the franchise was finding its footing, so it makes sense that there'd be a few fumbles here and there. However, come Smash 4, the developers were already grizzled veterans. They'd figured out what made Smash work. I already mentioned Villager, but other newcomers from 4 have even better representation. For example, every single move in Mega Man's kit is a reference, but Little Mac references literally nothing. Now, I get it, when you hear that sentence, your immediate thought is, what is there to reference? And to that I reply, a lot! The thing most obviously missing from Little Mac's kit is the Star Punch. The Star Punch is, by far, the most iconic move in the Punch-Out franchise. Little Mac without the Star Punch would be like Yoshi without eggs. It's just wrong. Now, what most people would argue is supposed to be the Star Punch is Little Mac's KO Punch. But do you want to know the funniest part about that argument? Little Mac never uses the KO Punch! It's true, the KO Punch is a reference to the Punch-Out series, but it's not a move that Little Mac ever uses. In fact, the only time the KO Punch is used in the entire series is when Little Mac is not the protagonist. So, why give it to Little Mac? Well, one might argue, Little Mac is supposed to represent Punch-Out as a whole. Okay then, if he's supposed to represent Punch-Out as a whole, why doesn't he have the Star Punch? Regardless of the Star Punch's exclusion though, it's a great introduction to the rest of Mac's issues. Because it really wouldn't matter how many made-up moves they threw into Little Mac's kit if he at least handled the way he handles in Punch-Out. But he doesn't. Not in the slightest. In Punch-Out, Little Mac is always portrayed as physically weaker than his opponents. While his enemies can chunk his health bar in a single punch, Little Mac has to string together a ton of little punches to even keep up with the amount of damage that his opponent is dealing. The only time Mac is capable of throwing out a strong punch is with the Star Punch. Hence why its exclusion feels extremely weird. Additionally, even a frail old Frenchman is capable of sending Little Mac flying with a single punch. To me, all these little details suggest that Little Mac should be a light, speedy fighter that doesn't do a lot of damage. To make up for his lack of damage though, he'd be capable of some crazy long strings, sorta like Sheik. What'd we get in reality then? The fucking Incredible Hulk, that's what we got! Little Mac in Smash is this absolute fucking monster of a character. For some reason, Mac has super armor on a lot of his moves. What this means is that there are certain moves where he's just immune to knockback, so he can just power through anything you throw at him. On top of being able to face tank a sword to the face, Mac also hits like a goddamn truck in nearly all of his grounded moves. Now, listen, it's one thing to not make every single move a reference to something. It's actually a huge fucking problem when you make them do the complete opposite of what they're known for. Little Mac being this impenetrable brick wall of a human being would be like if Jigglypuff, a literal balloon animal, was the heaviest character in the goddamn game. Little Mac's entire design philosophy in Smash feels like Sakurai read a Wikipedia article for Punch-Out, then proceeded to come up with a moveset for him over lunch. So this Little Mac guy, he's a boxer? Yeah, we'll just make him hit really hard and throw the KO thing in there somewhere. Aside from that, there's a huge elephant in the room that I've still yet to discuss when it comes to what they did wrong with Little Mac, and that would be his air game. The very first hint we got that Little Mac wouldn't be good in the air was his reveal trailer, where Doc Lewis proclaims, "Quit fooling around up there. You ain't no air fighter, Mac." As if this is some super obvious aspect of Little Mac's character. Like, what? I understand the logic behind it. Little Mac doesn't fight in the air in Punch-Out, but like, tons of characters in Smash fight grounded. Link can't even jump on command in Ocarina of Time. Does that mean his air game in Smash should suck ass? No, obviously not! Because in a game like Smash, aerial moves are insanely important. At a certain point, you have to set aside being faithful to a series for the sake of balance, which is sort of what they did here. They made Little Mac's aerials suck to balance his absurd ground game, but, like, Can you see what went horribly wrong here? Whenever they had the opportunity to be faithful to Little Mac's fighting style, they ignored it. Except for one stupidly arbitrary reason that nobody even really thinks about. And that's the fact that Little Mac doesn't fight in the air. Well, except when he does a 3-star punch in the Wii game, then he fights in the air. Who gave this moveset the green light? Does Sakurai even play video games? How did he have time to make this overly complicated moveset for Robin and make a ChatGPT tier moveset for Little Mac? I hope by this point of the video, you can understand that I'm not just being a nitpicky little hater. This moveset is so confoundingly stupid that I genuinely believe Sakurai never played Punch-Out Wii, which would be fine if we were playing as the character from the arcade version, but we're not. We're playing as Little Mac from Punch-Out Wii, which makes the only real reference to his moveset being from the arcade game even more baffling. I'd also like to take a second to just put into perspective how even the other terribly represented characters in Smash at least play how you'd expect them to. Like Ganondorf's moveset might reference absolutely nothing he actually does in Zelda, but at least it makes sense. This bulky, evil-looking dude moves slow and hits like a truck? Yeah, that makes sense. This annoying dog has an annoying moveset? Yeah, that makes sense. But what logic is there behind a 5'7" teenager having superhuman strength? The one and only argument I've ever heard about how Little Mac is actually decently represented in Smash is that he's the underdog. And while I would agree if Little Mac was kind of a middling or lower tier character, Little Mac is quite literally the worst character in the game. Underdog implies that you have a disadvantage, not that you're a pushover that literal children can wipe the floor with. Mac rarely dies in one hit in Punch-Out, but he almost always does in Smash. At that point, he's only Little Mac in name. Almost every other aspect of his character is missing here. They couldn't even get the victory screens right, dude. In Punch-Out NES and Punch-Out Wii, Little Mac is this absolute dork when he wins. He's like, yeah, woohoo, but in Smash, he's this like gruff badass who can't be bothered to smile, and when he does, he's got this smug little grin like he knew he was going to win the entire time. This is not Little Mac, this is an imposter wearing his skin. Let's call him Little Crack, because that's the only fucking way someone of his size is capable of hitting so hard. Little Mac in Smash is a goddamn travesty. Sakurai hates this guy so much he didn't even give him his own stage. They made a generic boxing ring stage and then gave it a 50-50 chance of having some punch-out textures here and there. And guess what? In Ultimate, they just completely got rid of the 50-50. It's just a generic boxing ring stage now. Did I do something to piss Sakurai off in another life? Did he purposely make this bastardized version of my childhood hero to anger me specifically? If I had a hand in Little Mac's inclusion, I'd have made his stage have 3 characters for each respective circuit in Punch-Out Wii. On top of that, I'd probably include the characters from Punch-Out in the background somewhere, because as awesome as Little Mac is, Punch-Out is known for its absolutely amazing and culturally sensitive character designs. Character designs like Vodka, Drunkensky, and pizza pasta. Okay, maybe they're a little insensitive, but that doesn't change the fact that they're iconic as shit, and a major reason why people remember Punch-Out. Okay, phew, I'm getting a bit winded from the non-stop ranting. How about we just take a break to talk about what they did correctly? Well, Doc Lewis is here. He's Mac's trainer and talks about chocolate. That's accurate to Punch-Out. Mac's costumes are fairly accurate. Most reference either an outfit or a protagonist from Punch-Out. He gets bruises on the windscreen depending on how much damage you had when the match ended. That's a pretty cute detail and a homage to the very same visual mechanic in Punch-Out Wii. And that about sums up the list of everything accurate to Little Mac in Smash. If you made it this far into the video, I have to congratulate you for bearing with me while I rant about some of the most trivial shit on the planet. I know that it might seem like a really goofy thing to get upset about, but Punch-Out is a game super near and dear to my heart. I would go as far as to say Punch-Out Wii is the best game of all time. The animation, the characters, the voices, the gameplay, the soundtrack, all of it is burnt into my memories. When I die, scientists will crack open my skull and find the source code to Punch-Out Wii inside. That's the level of care and adoration we're working with here. With that in mind, I think it's a little more understandable why I felt the need to make a 5-page video essay about a single Smash Brothers character. It's just really silly to think about how they reprogrammed the entire game so that Minecraft Steve can build a dirt penis, but couldn't be bothered to give Little Mac the star punch. I doubt this video will even change anything though. There's zero chance Sakurai or anyone from Nintendo will ever stumble upon this video, and even if they did, it's not like they're going to go back into the game and revamp Little Mac's moveset from scratch just because some gaijin whined about it. So, what did I hope to accomplish with this video then? I want you to play Punch-Out Wii. That's really the only reason I made this video. Play it. Play it. Play it!